Okay, this time around we're going to take a look at another coding structure that we will use all the time. We're going to look at if-then statements. So they're similar in structure to while loops in that they start off with a Boolean and then have some code that tells it what to do if that Boolean is true. And then we'll take a look at what happens if it's not true. So we'll start off with a really simple statement, just a plain old if statement. In order to do that, I've got some code here, so let's walk through what's going on. First of all, I have this number called if then int, which right now I've just started off to be equal to 0. And we're going to change that once we've uploaded our code using our serial monitor, and I'll show you how that works. So we open our serial monitor with the serial begin standard, and then the first thing we're going to have it do is print this line here that says to enter an integer between 0 and 10. Okay, and then if you haven't watched the video on while loops, you're going to want to take a look at that because it will describe what this is doing here. But essentially this is telling the serial monitor that as long as nothing is available in this, if we haven't entered any value, do nothing. Once we enter some value, we exit this while loop and move on to the rest of the code. So what it's now telling it to do is replace this value of 0 up here that we gave if then int with the value that we just entered. This code serial.parseInt tells it to read in this value as an integer. Okay, now we begin the if part of our statement. So of course it begins with the word if, and then just like for our while loop, we have a Boolean that we're going to decide, is this true or not? If it is true, we do these lines of code, which in this particular case, so here we're comparing this number we just typed in to the number 5. And we're saying if it's less than 5, then print the line, your input is less than 5. Then print a blank line. If that's not true, we tell it not to do anything. And then at the very end, we're again telling it to read in this value. So let's take a look at what happens when we upload this code. All right, you can see that it just asked us to enter an integer between 0 and 10. So remember the number we're comparing to is 5. So I'm going to start off by entering a value of 4 and watch what happens. It tells me your input is less than 5 right here. And then it asks me for another one. So let's see what happens when we put in one that's not bigger than 5. It doesn't do anything. It just asks me for a new integer. When I enter 3, I again see that my input is less than 5 and it asks me for a new one. Okay, so we might want, since we are asking for a number between 0 and 10, we might want to change the behavior a little bit so that if it's between 5 and 10, we get some other output. So actually, let's change this now to 10. So if it's less than, let's say less than or equal to 10, we're going to have it say, you followed the instructions. Okay, so again, we can check that out. We follow the instructions and we're going to put in 12. And it doesn't tell us anything, just asks for a new integer. Okay, now let's see what happens. We can use an else statement. So else statement is what happens whenever this is not true. So what we're going to do is say if it's not less than or equal to 10, then you did not follow the instructions. And we'll put a blank line in there just to make things. Okay, and let's see what happens now. I neglected a semicolon. So we'll add that in. right, so now it's asking us for a number between 0 and 10. We'll put in the number 6. We'll ignore that for now. Now, we can keep trying that. Let's look at 2. We followed the instructions. Let's look at 15. We did not follow the instructions. Now, some of you may be thinking about the fact that what happens if the number is less than 0. So let's test that and see what happens. Notice that this is actually an error in our logic. So when I put in a negative number, so let's say -5, that is in fact less than or equal to 10, which means we are in this part of the if-then statement, which means it should be telling us that we followed our instructions. So let's check that again. -5 tells us we did in fact follow the instructions. So let's think about how we might change that. And the way we're going to do that is just change the structure of this sentence. So we want to say here, if then int is greater than or equal to 0, and if then int is less than or equal to 10. So this is a Boolean and, which is telling us this has to be true and this has to be true in order to enter this part of a sentence statement. And if neither of those is true, then or if one of them is false, at least one of them is false, we kick over to here. So let's take a look at that. Right, we're going to enter our number, so we'll start with one that we know should be true. We want a number between 0 and 10. Tells us we followed the instructions. Let's look at a number bigger than 10. Tells us we did not follow the instructions. I still forgot to correct my spelling mistake. And let's look at a number that's less than 0. It tells us this time we did not follow the instructions. So adding that and statement right there allowed us to eliminate any negative. Let's say that we change this back to a 5 here. So now, anytime we enter a number that's between 0 and 5, let's print out your number is between 0 and 5. And now we're going to add an additional statement in here and say else if. So we're going to enter the else if part, and again we're going to have another Boolean statement, something that we're going to decide is it true or false. And we only enter this if this one is false. So let's think about if we are entering a number like 6, it's going to kick us into this. So here let's look at if then int is less than or equal to 10, we can now say that we'll use our serial print line to write out your number is between 6 and 10. And we'll print a blank line. Let me not forget that semicolon. All right, this closes our else if statement. Okay, now you might be thinking, don't these two overlap? But the fact is, the way this works is we only enter the else if statement if this were false. So between 0 and 5, we're going to start off here, do this, and kick out. Between 5 and 10, we'll enter here, and then any other number that's either bigger than 10 or smaller than 0 will not land in either of these two, and we'll resort to this else here where it says we did not follow the instructions, and this time we'll correct the spelling mistake. So let's take a look at verifying that code and see what happens now. I have a comma instead of a period there. Enter a negative number. A flaw in the logic. So I lied before when well, no, I actually told the truth, but what I forgot to remember is that numbers like -14 will fail this test, but will pass this one. So we also have to include All right, so let's take a look at that case again. So -14, let's walk through the logic. Putting -14 here. If that is greater than 0 or less than 5, do this. Neither of those is true. Before, this just said if it was less than or equal to 10, do this. Well, that was true before. -14 is less than or equal to 10. But now we've added this second stipulation that it has to be a positive number. It has to be greater than 0 and less than or equal to 10. Otherwise, it should say we didn't follow the instructions. So this time, it does tell us we didn't follow the instructions. So again, let's walk through. We'll look at 0. It tells us it's between 0 and 5. We'll look at 3. It tells us it's between 0 and 5. We'll look at 6. It tells us it's between 6 and 10. We'll look at 10. It tells us it's between 6 and 10. We'll look at a number bigger than 10. Oops, that's not a number. It tells us we didn't follow the instructions. Let's type in some letters. Version that I can't really explain, but it just decided that that is in fact between 0 and 5. So that is a little bit strange and not an easy way around that. So let's look again at a negative number, and it tells us we did not follow the instructions. All right, so that should help you understand a little bit about how if-then loops work and how to add an else-if statement to those when you need a second condition.